Welcome to the video series, Leave No Trace for Stock Users. If you bring stock animals into the great outdoors, you've come to the right place. This series is brought to you by the USDA Forest Service in cooperation with the Leave No Trace Center for Outdoor Ethics and the Backcountry Horsemen of America. Bob Hoverson is one of your hosts for this series. Bob is a master instructor of packing and leave no trace camping and stock use skills. He shares his 30 years of experience and knowledge of proper theory, technique, and equipment for safely and efficiently packing horses and mules using the Leave No Trace principles.
Leave No Trace is the umbrella name of the program. The textbook definition of leave no trace is make it difficult for others to see or hear you and leave no evidence that you were there. I guess to put it in other words, it's to respect other users and take care of the land.
Bob is joined by Smoke Elser, who has spent more than 5 decades as a commercial outfitter in Montana's Bob Marshall Wilderness. Smoke is one of the founding fathers of the concepts and practices of Leave No Trace packing. They're joined by Ben Lawhon, Education Director at the Leave No Trace Center for Outdoor Ethics.
You know, the genesis of the Leave No Trace program really came out of the passage of the Wilderness Act in 1964. We as an organization didn't start until 1994, so there was this 30-year period where there's this outdoor ethic that's emerging amongst all these different user groups, whether stock users or paddlers or climbers or day hikers. And in the last decade, we've really seen a big convergence of all these different types of outdoor users that have come together under this umbrella of Leave No Trace.
And I guess how I got started in it, in a way, was economics. I found that to take care of the land meant that I was going to have a better economic future in outfitting as a commercial outfitter, and kept developing equipment of all kinds and making our horses do less damage to the resource, so that I could use those same camps year in, year out, every year, and make it work.
We really have here in the last several years. We've pulled these programs together where we are working together. It doesn't matter what user group we're dealing with. Right. We're all on the same page.
Leave No Trace has 7 principles, and each one will be covered in a separate chapter in the series. The 7 principles are: plan ahead and prepare, travel and camp on durable surfaces, dispose of waste properly, leave what you find, minimize campfire impacts, respect wildlife, and be considerate of other visitors. The series will also include chapters on front country considerations, assembling a minimum impact camp, and equipment and technique for stock containment and grazing.
What we're trying to do is actually change your mindset so that you're thinking about Leave No Trace every day in everything that you do. You're starting to think, geez, if I could do that a little differently, it would be better, and it would be better for the resource.
It's a mindset that takes you all the way to your backyard. This isn't just a wilderness concept.
That's right. That's right.
It plays throughout your whole life, and it's front country, it's back country, it's wilderness, it's your own backyard. It applies everywhere.
Leave No Trace is not rules and regulations.
Right.
It's a framework for making good decisions about how to leave less impact on the land. And once you have the building blocks of that framework, regardless of where you are, you have these skills and these techniques that can work virtually anywhere.
Outdoor recreation has been steadily increasing since the 1960s. Today, nearly 200 million people visit national forests, and hundreds of millions more recreate in national and state parks every year. That's a lot of potential impact on the resource, particularly in the East, where the open spaces are surrounded by larger populations. A common question about Leave No Trace is, what exactly are the problems we're trying to address? Bob Hoverson outlines some of the main concerns.
As we talk about what are those actual impacts, obviously trash and litter. We talk about barren core, just using a piece of land to the point where we've completely denuded it of vegetation. We try not to impact the existing vegetation. Campfires can be very unsightly and they attract garbage, but we can have an absolutely no impact campfire and still enjoy every aspect of a campfire experience that we want. Weeds, obviously we don't want to spread weeds, which we can do quite easily with our stock use, scattering weed seeds that might be in the hay that the animals have eaten before they even head into the backcountry. If we feed our stock clean hay a few days before we actually head into the backcountry, we've just taken one more step to lessen our impacts. Waste disposal, human waste, pet waste, or stock waste, we have techniques for reducing those impacts. Wildlife, there's the chipmunks, the squirrels, as well as, of course, the elk and the deer and the bears. We'll go through at length on how to handle those kinds of situations. Noise is a big issue, especially in a front country situation where you have a lot of people close by. As stock users, we put bells on them so we can find them again. Well, sometimes folks find that obnoxious, and we have to be cognizant of that. In a front country, somebody with a horse trailer can pull into a parking lot, and you park sideways in a parking lot and you take up 5 parking spaces. You know, that's not being considerate of the next person that comes along. Throughout this video, we'll show the practices that we can do to lessen our impacts. And one of the things we do is site rehab. If we just take the last 5% of our experience in a campsite as we're getting ready to move, if we'll just do a good job of site rehab, picking up trash and scattering the manure, taking care of our high lines, any impacted area, covering it back up basically, in most instances, will take care of the problem.
Thank you very much. You know, I've had people in the hills 40 years ago, and they come back now with their grandkids, and they say, gee, we camped in this same place, and you know, that rock is still right there. And so is that old tree that we sat under and caught those fish. We evidently left no trace because everything is still here, and my grandkids can enjoy it.
Leave No Trace is all about personal ethics and responsibility. To inform that ethic, the USDA Forest Service teamed with other public and private outdoor organizations to develop the concepts of Leave No Trace. Today, the national program is managed by the nonprofit Leave No Trace Center for Outdoor Ethics. The center unites 5 federal land management agencies with manufacturers, outdoor retailers, and user groups, educators, and individuals who share a commitment to maintain and protect our wildlands.
In 1979, a wilderness ranger with the Forest Service wrote this paper and put this idea out that these impacts aren't caused by people intending to do harm to the land. Regulations aren't always effective at dealing with these sorts of issues. And so the idea was, how do we come up with an education program where we can actually teach people how to enjoy the outdoors in a responsible way? And so as we moved into the 80s, the Forest Service eventually said, we're going to call this the Leave No Trace program, which eventually led to an outdoor recreation summit in 1993. And the determination was made that there needed to be a nonprofit entity that could raise money and build partnerships and create materials and drive awareness, and also work in concert with the various agencies and other entities to really promote this notion of an outdoor ethic. And so in 1994, our organization was formed. We're the Leave No Trace Center for Outdoor Ethics. We've been around now for 20 years.
You know, hearing the history of Leave No Trace in the Forest Service, a lot of that really does come from the stock program. Looking at our horses and our mules, that's part of our heritage within the Forest Service. That's how we would supply firefighters out in the field. That's how we still supply trail crews in wilderness areas, supply the remote lookout towers. And how we do that now is very minimal impact. These skills, these principles we're putting forward are really the heritage of our country.
You know, Leave No Trace is a program that's really built on both skills and ethics. And the skill piece is certainly something that we can teach in a relatively short time frame. Where the ethic comes in is really about that notion of this connection to the land. You know, I like to think of an ethic as it's what you do when nobody's watching. You know, it's the decisions that you make when you're the only decision maker there.
You know, it goes back to our first chief, Gifford Pinchot, who talked about the greatest good. And Leave No Trace is very much part of our greatest good.
Thanks for taking the time to learn more about Leave No Trace, and welcome to a growing partnership that is enjoying and protecting America's great outdoors heritage. In Part 2, we'll cover the first Leave No Trace principle: plan ahead and prepare. We'll see you then. Welcome to Leave No Trace for Stock Users, the video series for folks who bring stock animals into the great outdoors. In part 1, we introduce the concept and history of Leave No Trace, including the 7 principles: plan ahead and prepare, travel and camp on durable surfaces, dispose of waste properly, leave what you find, minimize campfire impacts, respect wildlife, and be considerate of other visitors. In part 2, we'll begin to look at each of these principles in greater detail, beginning with the first principle: plan ahead and prepare. Your hosts for this series are Bob Hoverson, a stock user and packer with decades of experience with the U.S. Forest Service, and Smoke Elser, a commercial outfitter on the Bob Marshall Wilderness in Montana for more than 50 years.
We're going to talk about plan ahead and prepare. It's probably the most important aspect of anything we talk about, because we can't start a trip until we've totally thought through everything that we're going to do in regard to the trip.
The big thing is go and have fun. And you can't have fun unless you plan and prepare.
The first thing to consider is the size of your party, keeping in mind that smaller is usually better for both humans and animals.
The smaller the party size, the fewer number of stock we have, the lesser our impacts. Most areas we go into will actually have party size limits where you can't exceed.
The next tip is to avoid high-use times of the year and times that may be sensitive for wildlife.
If you know it's 4th of July weekend and you know everybody in the world's going to be there, if you want to really enjoy yourself, you might be better off to pick a different weekend.
Yeah, when you see all the horse traders heading for the trailhead, maybe not a good place to go.
Yeah, and then also there's times of the year when you're being there, it could be an impact in itself. If we're talking about spring fawning and calving, going into areas where there are substantial wildlife herds, we can cause impact. So if we can avoid those times, so much better.
You should always check the current conditions for your destination and plan the most appropriate route for the size and skill level of your party.
Conditions can change from one week to the next even. And then when you do plan a trip, make sure that the route that you select is a route that everybody in your party is going to be capable of. Some routes through the backcountry can be pretty hazardous. So matching your group and your stock to the trail that you're picking out is extremely important.
Yeah.
Be aware of all regulations for the area you'll be visiting. For example, camping permits, area closures, and parking permits.
There are probably going to be some type of regulations, and regulations aren't the same every place you go, whether you're talking about the type of use that you can go, the time of year that you can go there. Conditions change.
And sometimes from district to district they change just a little bit. Because that one district may say you're allowed to have 15 people, the other one says you're allowed to have 15 heartbeats. Well, that counts your horses too, see?
These are for the little wranglers.
Before you go, it's a good idea to contact previous users of the resource, folks who know the area well.
For instance, if you're going into the Bob Marshall Wilderness, there's no better person to talk to than Smoke. So those are the kind of contacts that you like to make to find out where to go, where to camp, what to do, what not to do.
In many parts of the country, trees across the trail and insect damage to trees can affect the quality and safety of your visit.
We have tree problems in the backcountry where places that used to be beautiful, ideal campsites 5-10 years ago are nothing but a sea of snags now. So want to check that out, because those are significant safety concerns to pay attention.
And that also tells you how sharp to get your saw and how sharp to get your axe. And if it's real thick timber, you're going to have to spend maybe more hours getting there just to cut out to clear the trail.
An axe, bucket, and shovel are required for campfires, but are also useful for clearing trails.
We like to clear a trail if we can, rather than going around things and making new trails around obstacles. Anytime you have an opportunity to stop and clear the trail, it's just that much better for the trail resource to do that.
And that deals with the old regulation, an axe, bucket, and shovel on every vehicle and on every pack string. I've come across campfires that were still burning, so you got to have a bucket on your stock somewhere.
Safety should always come first, and that means having an emergency plan with contacts, contingencies, and equipment for any scenario you may encounter.
Sometimes things happen, and it's better to be prepared for that than it is to let it happen and then not know what to do. So try to have an emergency plan, know who to contact, how to contact somebody if certain things happen.
And with the new GPS systems, some can send a signal to your home or to whoever you would designate, and that's a real good idea.
You should never hit the trail without packing a proper first aid kit for the size of your party, a veterinary kit for your stock, and the knowledge to use both of them.
If you don't know how to use your vet kit or your first aid kit, you just as well leave them at home. It's a good idea to check with all the participants in your party to see who might be a nurse, who might be a doctor. And I always try to go to my veterinarian and ask him what kind of things he thinks I should take this year.
Your stock animals need to be equipped and prepared for the terrain you'll be visiting.
Make sure all of your animals are freshly shod, or at least shod to where their shoes are going to stay on for whatever trip you're going to take.
You should never assume that campfires are permitted. Fire restrictions may be in place depending on the time of the year, so check the policy in advance.
If campfires aren't allowed, you got to have a different way to prepare your meals. Same way with the feed for your stock. If there is not enough grazing available, you have to pack supplemental feed, and you need to make sure that it's certified weed seed free hay. Weeds are a tremendous problem in this day and age. If you're traveling on public land, you have to be aware of that.
When packing food, a bear-proof container is a good idea and may be required, and it helps to repackage food items, as we see in Smoke's demonstration.
Okay, yeah, when we go to the mountains with our pack string, we try to reduce the amount of weight that we carry in the hills. And by doing that, we can reduce the number of stock. And by reducing the number of stock, of course, we leave less trace that we've been there. We repackage just about everything. And the key to this thing is to go light, pack out as little garbage as you have to, plan your meals so that you eat just about everything you take in. And we use dehydrated foods. We found that today's dehydrated foods are real good. And we can buy a lot of the things right over the counter at the grocery store.
A tricky topic is whether or not to bring your dog along for the ride. Bob and Smoke have some ideas on that.
I love dogs as much as anybody, but dogs on a pack trip can be a real problem. Most of the time, if I meet somebody with a dog and I'm coming down the trail with a pack string, I worry more about the people's dog than I do about my mules.
They think their dog is great defense. Actually, he's the opposite. Because if a dog starts to bother a bear, the bear will chase the dog, and the dog, guess where he runs? Right between your legs.
As we said earlier, minimizing the number of stocks and people in your party is important. This will help you reduce the size of your loads.
An animal is capable of carrying 200 pounds. If you're putting 100 pounds on them, you're just not utilizing that animal to their fullest capacity, and that normally means you got to take a second animal along, and that just compounds your problem.
And we're looking at not the maximum, not the minimum, but the optimum load. And that's about 20% of the animal's weight.
Never wait until the last minute to check your gear. Make time to make sure your equipment is in good shape before your trip.
Really pay attention to your gear, whether it's your pickets, your hobbles, your high lines, your pack saddles, your riding saddles, your
ropes.
Yeah, ropes. It's always good to check it over and make sure going in that everything's...
Yeah, we had a disaster not too long ago. We went into the tack room and just pulled off a saddle that hadn't been used in about 20 years. And the leather and everything was so brittle that we spent the rest of the pack trip fixing that saddle, trying to get up the trail, because it just kept falling apart.
It's also important to have all of your animal immunizations and documents up to date.
Normally, if you're traveling across any county lines or state lines, you have to have a health certificate from a veterinarian, which will usually require a Coggins test. You have to have a current brand inspections. And these are big deals, because you will get fined for that sort of thing. So, and it's just the right thing to do.
Lastly, don't take shortcuts when you're planning and preparing. Do the research at every step.
This is all really important stuff to consider in detail. Each one of these things that we talk about takes some major research. It doesn't just happen in 5 minutes, or you don't just pick up and go. You got to plan ahead and prepare and be ready for these trips for them to be successful.
Thanks for watching and for practicing Leave No Trace. In our next segment, we'll talk about the Leave No Trace principle, travel and camp on durable surfaces. We'll see you then. Welcome to Leave No Trace for Stock Users, the video series for folks who bring stock animals into the great outdoors. This series follows the 7 principles of Leave No Trace. Plan ahead and prepare. Travel and camp on durable surfaces. Dispose of waste properly. Leave what you find. Minimize campfire impacts. Respect wildlife. And be considerate of other visitors. The topic for this part of our series is Travel and camp on durable surfaces. Your hosts for this series are Bob Hoverson, a stock user and packer with decades of experience with the U.S. Forest Service, and Smoke Elser, a commercial outfitter on the Bob Marshall Wilderness in Montana for more than 50 years.
Okay, we've talked about planning ahead and preparing for a trip. Now let's talk about the nuts and bolts of how we go about making that trip. And the first thing we want to talk about is traveling and camping on a durable surface. Surfaces that are resistant to impact, or if they do cause a disturbance, it's a disturbance that's easy to rehab.
You know, this is probably one of the most important parts of using your judgment to protect the resource so that we have it for future generations and for other campers that are coming in the future.
So what we're looking at, things like rocky outcrops. This site that we're on here right now would be an example of a very good site. We have a lot of rock showing on the ground. We're on a very dry surface. The grasses are very conducive to camping on them and resilient to pop back after we leave from here. So it's the type of surface that we would look for.
Besides rocky outcrops, other good choices to look for include sandy soils, though not too near a stream or riverbank. Sandy soils are resilient and easy to rehab. The same is true for gravelly areas.
Some of the areas where you have bigger rivers, the river channels have changed through time, and you'll have places where an old river channel was, and you have a very rocky, gravelly type of soil, and you can camp on that type of a soil.
Yeah, real easy.
And even though your stock might dig things up and cause disturbance, it's very easy to fill that back in and rehab it.
Yeah, and then quite often, fairly close to a river like that, you're going to have meadows or places. If you're going to free graze your animals, you have a place just back of your camp that's going to be readily available to use.
Sites to avoid when selecting a camp include wetlands and riparian areas. It's important to leave some distance between your campsite and a river, stream, or other water source.
We try to locate our camps a minimum of 200 feet from water sources, from rivers and streams. The intent is to get as far away from the water as you can reasonably get and not have an impact on the water source. So we try to stay 200 feet from the water, and it's a good idea to be 200 feet from the trail if that's possible also. Staying out of that riparian zone where wildlife travel and where you cause more impacts, mainly because it's a wetter site as a rule.
The season and current weather conditions will influence the types of durable surfaces you will find.
A durable surface today may not have been a durable surface a month and a half ago. In the spring, a lot of these surfaces aren't very durable because they're wet and muddy. And so it's important to try to travel when your campsites and the places where you are going to go, the ground is just a whole lot more durable just due to the time of the year and the fact that it's dried out.
This is a judgment call on you. You know, sometimes you might have to be 150 feet away from water, or you may have to be 300 feet away from water in order to protect that riparian zone, as well as create a campsite that is desirable for you, and when you leave, it's going to be desirable for the next person that comes along to camp there.
Be aware that all habitats are not suitable for travel or camping. Some surfaces in dry or desert areas should never be used for camping, so you should do your research on the area before you visit. High mountain passes also pose challenges for campsite selection.
High mountain passes are really kind of critical also, because there's a lot of mosses and so forth that live up there, and when your horse makes a track across that track generally stays there for years. So it's easy to damage those high alpine areas.
We got to remember that trampling causes vegetation damage and soil erosion on virtually every environment, no matter where we are. Because our animals are big and heavy-footed, they can cause damage to the vegetation and to the soil, and really that's what we're talking about when we talk about durable surfaces. We want to not cause soil erosion and leave the vegetation as it was.
In the more popular or heavily used areas, you should concentrate your impact on existing trails and campsites.
If a site already exists, there's no point in going right next to that site and creating a new site. If a site is already there, I guess you could say the impacts are already there. There's no point in moving on and creating another one. So in the more popular areas, you concentrate your use and use the established campsites.
The opposite is true for the remote, more pristine areas. In those spots, it's better to spread out your impacts.
When you get into those higher, more pristine areas, generally those sites are more fragile. We try to spread our use and we select the most durable site we can find, but good campsites are found, not made. That's really the key with a campsite is try to locate a natural campsite that works for you and don't get in there and start altering the habitat and the whole area to accommodate your needs.
And you know, those pristine areas in particular, they're to look at. They're not necessarily to travel on and to camp on. That's what we go to the mountains to do, is to look at those very beautiful sites that just knock your eyes out when you look at them.
Another way to avoid concentrating your impacts in sensitive remote areas is to not ride your horses in single file, which is more likely to cause wear in an area that may take years to recover. But the rule is reversed when you travel on well-established trails in high-use areas.
When you're traveling on the trail, try to ride single file. Stay on the trail so that everybody's on the trail in one spot and you're not going willy-nilly and causing new trails through that country.
Yeah, and you know, a lot of people, they like to talk to each other when they're riding down the trail. Golly, side by side just doesn't work. You know, trails are not built for that.
In many places, and on all national forest land, you are not permitted to loose herd or let your animals run free on the trail. Bob and Smoke say that stock will occasionally break from the pack, which can have negative impacts.
The problem with that is they have a tendency to stop and graze along the way, and then when they realize they've been left behind, they run up the trail, they run up the banks, and they just cause damage to the sides of the trails. So that's why we talk about, not loose herding, keep your animals pigtailed together and strung out, and you just cause less damage. That's the whole idea.
That's right. And those horses, when they're loose like that, they always pick the easiest way. And sometimes the easiest way is not where the trail went.
When traveling on a trail, the best way to leave no trace is to stay on the trail.
Don't take shortcuts. Don't cut to switchbacks. Avoid creating social trails. In a camp setting, the trails from your tent sites to your kitchen, from your kitchen to your toilet facilities, your kitchen to where your stock is, it's real easy to create social trails to each one of those things, and we try not to do that so you don't make obvious trails that go to the same place all the time. So it's just something to pay attention to in a camp setting. And again, the more durable the site, the less of a problem that is. The more fragile the site, the more important it is that you don't create those social trails.
Traveling and camping on durable surfaces is all about making smart choices to reduce your impacts.
We leave the greatest trace on the land by inappropriate choices of where we camp and travel. If we don't make the right choice about the land, then our impacts are much, much greater. So for the particular area that you're traveling in, learn to recognize what is a durable surface in your area and what is a more fragile surface in your area, and pick those durable surfaces to camp on and to travel on. And your impacts will be far, far less.
And again, we can't give you a rule book to follow on durable surfaces. What we can do is hopefully create thoughts in your mind of how you can protect the natural resources and use good, durable surfaces, especially with them big 1,000-pound animals you're riding.
Thanks for watching and for practicing Leave No Trace. In our next segment, we'll cover the Leave No Trace principle, dispose of waste properly. We'll see you then. Welcome to Leave No Trace for Stock Users, the video series for folks who bring stock animals into the great outdoors. This series follows the 7 principles of Leave No Trace. Plan ahead and prepare, travel and camp on durable surfaces, dispose of waste properly, leave what you find, minimize campfire impacts, respect wildlife, and be considerate of other visitors. The topic for this part of our series is dispose of waste properly. Here's Ben Lawhon.
When we talk about the spectrum of options for disposing of human waste, we have to think about what do we do when there are no toilets, no privies, no outhouses. And the standard is what we call the cat hole. And a cat hole is nothing more than a 6 to 8 inch deep hole that's dug 200 feet from water sources, campsites, and trails. And the idea is that we want to find a good location where we can put our human waste in a place where it will not impact water sources or wildlife, insects, other people, and that sort of thing. So essentially, we find a location. We want to take out that top plug of soil and remove that soil and set it aside. And we're going to use that soil. And then we start to dig down, making that hole 6 to 8 inches deep, to make a pile of soil right next to the cat hole, because that's ultimately how you'll fill this thing back in. So once you get the hole dug, make your deposit in the hole. There are a variety of different toilet papers out there on the market. What we want is to have good rapid breakdown of this stuff in the soil. 2 options here. One is it can either be buried deeply in the hole using a stick. The other option is you can dedicate a Ziploc bag to pack out your toilet paper, but it is acceptable to bury it in the hole. It's not a bad idea to add some of the soil back in. Take a stick and maybe stir that in. And then, of course, you want to leave that stick in the hole because it's contaminated as well. So leave the stick in the hole. The hole gets covered up back with the original soil that you had in. Take that plug that you took out initially and put that back on top of the hole. And then you want to naturalize the site so that it looks as if you were never there, and that waste is contained. You're protecting water sources, you're minimizing the chances for the spread of disease, and you're minimizing those social issues where someone else may come upon this cat hole. The last key thing about cat holes is sanitation. Use a soap or use one of the alcohol-based hand sanitizers. One other key consideration when we talk about proper disposal of human waste is the disposal of urine. And urine tends to be relatively harmless in the environment unless it's concentrated in significant amounts. And so the recommendation for urine is the same as solid human waste. To the extent that you can get 200 feet from water, camp, and trails, find barren ground or rock to urinate on. Follow the same guidelines as you would for solid human waste and you'll make the right decisions. The issue of disposing of feminine hygiene products. We never recommend burying those items. We generally don't recommend burning those items, just as we don't recommend burning trash. The key recommendation or the key guideline there is to pack those items out.
The use of cat holes for waste disposal is essential when you're on the trail or in backcountry. When you reach camp, you may have other options, as Bob Hoverson explains.
When we're in camp, generally as stock users on a pack trip, we're always packing a shovel. So we have the same opportunity with a shovel and a roll of toilet paper that a trowel does. So that's probably the simplest method. We just go out and dig the hole, same thing, do it just like we did with the cat hole and a hand trowel. Now, another option is to do what we call a slip trench, and just a homemade box toilet that gives us a little more comfort, but it allows us to dig that same 6 to 8 inch hole and have a box toilet to set on. After each use, you can put a little dirt in there. You just move the box toilet down and move the toilet right along the slip trench. The toilet paper, using an RV style toilet paper is definitely a desired method. If it's allowed, we oftentimes use a waste digester. It just promotes the breakdown quicker. Another option that I like, this is just called basically a luggable loo. All it is a bucket with a lid on it with a toilet seat. Put a plastic sack in there to keep the inside of your toilet clean. Cat litter works very, very well to hold down odor. It actually absorbs the moisture out of your deposit and helps it dry out a whole lot quicker. Now, if we want to get a little bit more elaborate, a privacy shelter is desirable. This particular toilet here, I put a board down in the bottom that actually holds my toilet seat in place, so it's very sturdy. What I have in here is a plastic sack that I've cut the bottom out of, so I actually have a tube. When we get all done, it's a very simple process. I fold the plastic over, I can remove my packable box toilet, just lays down flat. My sack is still in the hole, and I'll actually push that down in the hole, remove my board. I'll come in here with another plastic sack, and when you're dealing with waste, put your gloves on, and that sack gets packed out as garbage. Another method is, instead of digging a hole, I just put a bucket inside that box toilet, put a little water in it, and when it comes time to flush, we can go to any suitable location out there, dig the hole, and dispose of the waste. We've saved the plug to go back in the toilet hole. We naturalize the system, and we're good to go.
Whether using a cat hole or some other method, remember that whatever waste or bags you pack out must be disposed of properly. They should not be thrown in latrines or pit toilets. Some locations may require that you pack out your human waste. There are options to do that which are safe and sanitary. Always check the regulations before you travel. When it's time to break down your campsite, it's time to deal with trash and micro-trash, according to Smoke Elser.
There's always leftover food, and that's one of the biggest problems to get rid of. And there's dishwater to get rid of, there's hand washing water to get rid of, and there's generally a lot of little stuff that lays around camp all the time. Little micro trash like this stuff laying here, and I always put it in a plastic bag, but I also use one of my stuff sacks to put it in, because then I don't punch holes in the bag. Then we come to the larger things like spaghetti. Boy, everybody likes to pitch that out. Not a good idea. So what we'll do is we just put that right in our trash to take out with us. We use a camp soap, which is biodegradable. And of course, we'll take that water and we'll scatter that out away from camp. And we spread it. We don't pour it into anything. What I like to do is take my soapy dishwater, and with all the food particles in it, what I'll do is pour it into my rinse water through the screen like that, so that I can collect all of the little pieces on the screen. I want to make sure I'm taking dishwater, hand washing water, and all the wastewater well away from camp and always away from the streams and trails, at least 200 feet. Here's one of the big things: banana peelings and orange peelings. Those are the things that you need to pack out. Believe it or not, an orange peeling will last about a year. A banana peeling will last almost a half a year.
The next piece of the waste disposal puzzle deals with stock waste. Here's Bob Hoverson.
There's several different places where we deal with stock waste, and a couple of different methods that we use. The first place we're going to deal with stock waste is when we arrive at a trailhead. When you're hauling stock, you end up with quite a buildup of manure in your trailer. We like to keep that cleaned out, but the thing you don't want to do is shovel your trailer at the trailhead. So the best thing you can do, you pick it up and you throw it right back in your trailer, or carry a can with you so that manure can just be deposited in the can. Carry a manure fork in your trailer. It's the simplest way to take care of manure. It's very easy to pick that up. Anytime it's concentrated to any great extent, pick it up, clean it up, scatter it. Just breaking it up and scattering it allows for decomposition much quicker, and it doesn't allow it to pile it up to where it becomes a problem that can't be remedied.
Bob also has some guidelines if you travel with your pets on a stock trip.
Our normal recommendations when we're traveling with stock is that we don't take dogs and pets along, but we know people do, and there's nothing wrong with that. But we got to keep in mind that pets distribute waste out there too, and it's something that we really do need to take care of. So a very simple, easy way to do that is to, if you have pets, you should always have access to some type of plastic sack. You can turn that sack inside out, reach down, grab the dog deposit, turn it back around it, seal it up, and that deposit just goes right out in our garbage, just like everything else. If you don't have access to a bag, we treat it just like a cat hole method. We just dig a little hole, put it in the cat hole, and cover it up, and it's the best way to take care of it. The main thing is we take care of it.
Thanks for watching and for practicing Leave No Trace. In our next segment, we'll talk about the Leave No Trace principle: leave what you find. We'll see you then. Welcome to Leave No Trace for Stock Users, the video series for folks who bring stock animals into the great outdoors. This series follows the 7 principles of Leave No Trace. Plan ahead and prepare, travel and camp on durable surfaces, dispose of waste properly, leave what you find, minimize campfire impacts, respect wildlife, and be considerate of other visitors. The topic for this part of our series is Leave What You Find. To tell us more about that, here's Smoke Elser and Bob Hoverson.
Leave What You Find encompasses gathering objects that maybe shouldn't be gathered when you're on a backcountry trip. It involves structures of different kinds, building structures, and we also talk about noxious weeds and plants that we don't want growing and we don't want to introduce to the backcountry. So in terms of the gathering, the reason we don't want to pick up everything that we see out there, it allows other people to discover the same things that you're discovering as you're traveling through. And if you remove that stuff, if you pick the flowers, if you've gathered up things like arrowheads, a real prime example is antler hunting. Hunting antlers, sheds, is a recreational activity for a lot of people. It's income for some people. But when you start looking at it from an environmental standpoint, there are critters out there that rely on those horns. It's part of the food chain. And so it's just better to leave objects for others to enjoy. That's the whole intent of the gathering part of Leave What You Find.
Another important part of Leave What You Find is leave it as you found it. This applies to structures built in camp. A rule of thumb is that good camps are found, not built.
The one advantage we have as stock people is we are able to bring amenities with us in terms of tables and chairs and toilets. We're able to pack a few more things with us that backpackers, for instance, can't do. So building tent frames and leaving them, building tables and chairs are just something that we don't like to see no matter where it is. It's too easy to bring that kind of stuff along with you rather than building it on site, and it causes an impact on site when you do it. So we try to stay away from that. We also see impacts from people building their campsites. If you're on uneven ground, excavated tent sites, that's an impact. Doesn't have to be. If you select appropriate campsite that's on decent ground, you don't need to excavate the site. Meat poles, if you're in a hunting situation and you're lucky enough to kill something, yeah, you need to have a meat pole. But the deal with all of this is take it down when you're done. Obviously toilets, you got to have a toilet, but take it down when you're done.
Another problem to be aware of when camping is site creep, when your actions cause campsite impacts to extend beyond the original campsite borders. This is a common problem in campsites that are used year after year.
If you bring stock into a campsite and you don't do some of the stock containment things that we like to do nowadays, you damage or cause damage that can kill trees. The minute you kill the tree, you leave the camp, tree dies, somebody else comes in, they cut the tree down, use it for firewood, and then the next time a horse group comes in, that tree's no longer there, so they got to go back to the next tree to tie to, and it just progresses and progresses, and the site just constantly gets bigger. So we try to keep all of our activities within that core area that's already been disturbed, and don't cause that site creep to keep rolling.
The next critical issue is preventing the introduction and spread of invasive species and noxious weeds.
As stock users, we should all pay attention to noxious weeds because we can do nothing but lose if weeds become established. Forage for our animals. Some weeds are actually very difficult to camp in. Weed species like yellow star thistle. You get yellow star thistle established and you can't even camp there because it's nothing but a prickly pear patch. So the key with weeds is, one, learn to identify the species that are prevalent in your area. And every area, every state is not the same in terms of of the particular weeds you need to pay attention to in that area. So be familiar with the weeds that you're dealing with in your part of the country, and then do everything you can do to not introduce those particular weeds.
Yeah, you can go to your agricultural extension agent and you can get lists of all the weeds that are in that area and learn to identify them. And if we come into a campsite where the previous campers haven't been quite as prepared as we were, and gee, the campsite is all covered with all kinds of weeds. So I'll try to find another site, maybe where I can prevent any weed damage, because I know my horses have been curried out, all my pads are clean, our tents have all been shaken out, we don't have weed seeds with us. So when we leave that next site, we aren't going to leave any weeds there. So I try to stay out of those campsites, and I try not to travel right through a weed patch. And whenever I go into the backcountry and I locate a couple of places with weeds, the campsites are covered with weeds or have a lot of weeds in them, boy, I report that right away to the agency that's responsible for that, so that they might be able to go in there and do something about that.
Learning to identify problem plants and weeds is crucial. You should learn the specific ways to prevent the spread of weed seeds in areas you visit and the times of year you recreate in those areas.
It is far easier to prevent weeds from becoming established than it is to eradicate weeds once they have become established. So anything we can do to prevent the establishment of weeds, we are far ahead.
Yep.
As stock users, definitely cleaning our stock, brushing our animals out, making sure that we're not bringing weed seeds from home, feeding them appropriately at home with clean hay, so that when we go into the back country, they don't put manure out there that's going to actually spread weed seeds and cause weeds to grow. And then several of the states nowadays have gone to a requirement of weed seed free hay. It has to be certified weed seed free. It protects us, it protects the privilege of what we're trying to enjoy out there. And quite frankly, it doesn't cost that much when you really look at how much hay you actually will pack into the back country on a pack trip, and the difference in cost between regular hay and certified hay. It's just not that different, and it's well worth the expense. And it just shows that we care about what we're doing, and as stock users, we should just automatically do that and want to do that.
That's right. And you know, they have packer pellets, and they have weed seed free grain pellets. They have grain that's usually certified seed grain that they use to plant in the fields, and that's all weed seed free, and that's good grain also. And you know, your truck and trailers, you may need to make sure there's no weeds hanging up under them. Watch where you drive. Don't drive out across a weedy patch, because that's going to pick up all the weeds in the trailer and the truck. What we should do is try to spray our fenders out, give your truck or your rig a good wash down, and keep aware of where the weed seeds might hang up for you.
Leave No Trace is essentially a framework of principles based on an outdoor ethic, with good and bad extremes on either end of the spectrum.
You can go all the way from being a slob on one end of the line to being absolutely pure and pristine on the other end, and every one of us is somewhere in between those two things. Hopefully not very many of us are slobs, and we hope that through all of the Leave No Trace activities, you're moving more and more toward the pristine end.
The biggest thing about the whole Leave No Trace program is use what the matter you have between your two ears. Think, because we don't have all the answers. Nobody has all the answers. And you may be able to develop an answer for yourself that allows you to think about how you're going to camp, where you're going to camp, and how you're going to travel, that will really protect the resource for not only the future generation, but future generations.
Thanks for watching and for practicing Leave No Trace. The next segment in our series covers the Leave No Trace principle, minimize campfire impacts. Bob and Smoke will share some of the newest techniques for creating no-impact campfires while still enjoying the traditional campfire experience. We'll see you then. Welcome to Leave No Trace for Stock Users, the video series for folks who bring stock animals into the great outdoors. This series follows the 7 principles of Leave No Trace. Plan ahead and prepare, travel and camp on durable surfaces, dispose of waste properly, leave what you find, minimize campfire impacts, respect wildlife, and be considerate of other visitors. The topic for this part of our series is minimize campfire impacts. Your hosts are Leave No Trace experts Bob Hoverson, Ben Lawhon, and Smoke Elser.
You know, one of the things everybody wants to have is a campfire. Now, that's where you tell all the good stories. But you know, there's all kinds of campfires. You can have a great big bonfire, which is going to burn up half the forest. The other thing is you can have no campfire, where we actually go out in the meadow and everybody sits down and we just listen to the sounds of the night and watch the stars go by, which is a good system. But you may also want all kinds of campfire setups, and here are some of them that we recommend because they do little damage to the backcountry and they really give you the ambience of the campfire.
Whatever type of campfire you choose, it's important to select the right sized wood gathered from the right places.
We try not to build a campfire with anything any bigger than our wrist, and I've got some examples here. And by the way, we don't go out and break it all off of trees. We don't leave a sign that we've been there. We try to pick up scattered pieces of wood, and we don't pick it all off of one area. What we try to do is pick up a few here, a few there, and of course, these are the kind of limbs we don't want to pick up. A lot bigger than my wrist, and we're going to have to sit up all night to burn this whole piece of wood. So, and we don't want to leave half a charred piece of wood in our campfire. So we prefer to use sticks like this that we can break easily, and they're just the size of my wrist and no bigger. And it's easy to get this wood just by coming along and breaking it off yourself right there.
Once you've gathered your firewood, now you need to decide the best way to build your campfire. Here's Bob Hoverson.
The standard for eons has been the old style rock fire ring. Clear everything for 10 feet all the way around, build a great big old rock fire ring, have your fire. But the problem with that is it's very impactful. It's unsightly. Generally, you end up with a big mess, and we don't clean those up like we should. If you did have a fire like that, you've got to really pay attention to clean it up. But there are better alternatives, and almost virtually no impact when you walk away from a campsite. And there's a couple, 3 examples here. The easiest and simplest thing to do is to build what we call a mound fire. And it's simply taking a piece of fire cloth that's commercially available, welding cloth or some such thing, makes a real nice break between the surface of the ground and your actual campfire, and it makes it very, very simple to clean up. We take the cloth, we lay it on the ground, we put dirt on it. The stuff's built so you can't burn through it, but it doesn't blacken the blanket and make the blanket all messy if you put some dirt on it. And then you can have whatever fire you want on top of that mound of dirt, and pour water on this thing after it's cooled down, make a slurry out of it, and make really sure that your fire's out. The best thing you can do is work it with your hands to make sure that it's out. And once that's done, very simple to just fold the 4 corners of this thing up, take that dirt back to whatever source you got it from originally, stick it in there, and there's absolutely no sight that you ever had a fire right there on that spot. We as stock users have the ability to pack things a little more elaborate than a fire blanket. An old garbage can lid makes a wonderful fire pan, or an old barbecue grill. It's a hard container that makes it real easy to transport that dirt around. If the smoke gets going the wrong way, you can move it around. In this case, we just have it sitting on 3 rocks, get it up off the ground. Or if you want to build something that works very well, you can even turn this into a cooking source with a grate over the top of it and cook on that, as well as use it for your atmosphere type fire. And when you fold it up and leave, there's absolutely no sign that you've ever been there.
Another important tip for campfires is to always use an existing fire ring if one is present.
If it's there, if it exists, use it. Don't build multiple fire rings. Try not to build new fire rings when you roll into a campsite. Use these other methods, but if it's there, go ahead and use it. It's the right thing to do.
Now that you've got the basics, it's a good idea to understand exactly how a campfire impacts the environment. Here's Ben Lawhon.
we've got to consider what the impacts are associated with fires. Predominantly, the impacts are we can certainly scorch the earth underneath a fire. Research has shown that up to the first 10 centimeters of soil are scorched underneath where we have a campfire. So being mindful of that can be important, knowing that once you have a fire in a place, vegetation may not grow back there for, in some cases, decades. We also have to think about the potential for wildfire. There are cases where wildfires have been started by fires that were not properly managed, that got out of control. There's also issues of denuding an area of firewood, simply gathering all the firewood in an area where otherwise it would naturally decay and become part of the forest. Right along with that is the notion of burning food or trash in a campfire, and the fact that in many cases when animals enter in campsites, particularly bears, one of the first places they go visit is the campfire ring. And so being mindful of the cumulative impacts that can be caused by campfires. You know, Leave No Trace is not anti-fire by any means. Leave No Trace is about having responsible fires. But if you look at alternatives to campfires, there are a number of things that can be used. We've got things like gas lanterns that can be used to provide light. They run on fuel, we've got mantles, there are even battery-operated lanterns these days. We've got smaller lights that can be used in the backcountry to provide light. We have also things like candles. Having that central focus point around something such as a candle can accomplish the same thing as a fire in some cases. We've also got things like small handheld flashlights and even headlamps. So there are clearly alternatives to using campfires. But if you are going to have a fire, there are definitely things to consider. First of all, you need to know if fires are legal. Is there a fire ban in the area? Are fires allowed in the area? What types of fires? What type of fire ring or fire pan should you use? The next thing to consider is, are fires even safe? Is it too windy? Is it too dry? Are there other reasons why you may or may not want to have a fire? If you determine that it's legal and it's safe and it's responsible, you got to ask yourself, do I have the skills? Because fire can be a very powerful force in nature, can be a dangerous thing in the landscape if it's not used wisely and controlled. And so you've got to make sure you've got the skills to have a good fire, and then you've got to make sure you've got a way to put the fire out. You need to be able to manage that fire appropriately. In many locations, there are issues of invasive species being transported in firewood. So in some cases, you've got to purchase firewood locally. You know, research has shown that campfires do lead to impacts, and in a place like Great Smoky Mountains National Park, which is the most heavily visited national park in the country, they've documented over 3,000 stumps where people have cut trees down to use as firewood. So there are some real impacts associated with fires, and doing what we can to minimize those impacts is an important part of Leave No Trace.
You can also protect the environment by choosing not to burn trash and other debris in your campfire.
The Missoula Technology and Development Center did some research on looking at the toxins that are released from the types of trash that campers often burn. Things like plastic forks and foil-lined hot chocolate packets and cups and all manner of things. And what they found in this research is that there are a number of toxins that are released, that as we stand around a fire at night and enjoy the fire, we're actually breathing in these toxins, releasing them in the environment. So thinking about not burning trash, being conscious of your trash, pack it in, pack it out. You know, the same principles apply when dealing with campfires as they do with anything in the outdoors as far as trash is concerned.
Now here's Bob Hoberson with some final thoughts on campfires.
The real important considerations in any mound fire construction: where do you get the soil from? What do you do with it when you're done? Make absolutely certain your fire's out before you put it back, and do a completely thorough job of cleaning everything up, getting rid of all the unburned pieces. Hopefully you burned your fire up to ash, but if you haven't, naturalize those unburned pieces that are left in there. But as far as getting your soil, you want to go to a source off to the side. Maybe it's an old root ball where you have a bunch of soil exposed that's easily and ready to get to. You can take a bucket, or you can take your fire blanket over there, or your fire pan over there for that matter, put the soil in it, do your fire thing. Then you make sure the fire is completely out with water and mixing, and then once you've done that, the right thing to do is to take that soil and put it right back where you got it from in the first place.
Thanks for watching and for practicing Leave No Trace. The next segment in our series covers the Leave No Trace principle: respect wildlife. We'll see you then. Welcome to Leave No Trace for Stock Users, the video series for folks who bring stock animals into the great outdoors. This series follows the 7 principles of Leave No Trace. Plan ahead and prepare, travel and camp on durable surfaces, dispose of waste properly, leave what you find, minimize campfire impacts, respect wildlife, and be considerate of other visitors. The topic for this part of our series is the Leave No Trace principle, respect wildlife. Your hosts are Smoke Elser and Bob Hoverson.
When we talk about wildlife on any trip, no matter where you are, even if it's in a campground, this is their home. We're visitors to that, and so it's only right that we respect anything and everything about them. Even little critters are part of the natural food chain for all wildlife. So it's just right to know what we're doing and be respectful of those things. And the ways we do that, when we're talking about larger animals, bears or bison or elk or whatever it is, we can observe those animals from a distance and not push trying to get too close to them to get pictures and that sort of thing, so that we cause them to move or be disturbed from their natural habitat.
To help you keep your distance from wildlife, carefully select your campsite before you set up. Choose a spot that has no evidence of animal activity, such as carcasses or deer trails, and always pack the right equipment.
Make sure you have a pair of binoculars, telescopic lens on your cameras, so you don't have to get too close, and respect that wildlife, because that's their home. That's where the wildlife lives, and we're just visitors. And that's what we want to always be, is just visitors.
Be aware that certain times of the year are more sensitive for wildlife. During calving season in the spring and early summer, for example, learn as much as you can about conditions in the area for the season you'll be visiting. The next key consideration is to never feed animals. Resist the temptation to give leftovers to small critters or leave food particles or residue where wildlife can locate them.
A fed animal ends up being a dead animal. Sooner or later, something bad will happen to them. It certainly is true with bears. If you feed bears, it only takes once or twice for a bear to become habituated and want that food. Once they do that and they become a nuisance, generally they end up dead for one reason or another. So,
or even a raccoon. You know, if you're starting to feed a raccoon, or you're trying to feed those chipmunks, the next thing they're going to be into your food, and they can be a real pest and cause you really to take action against them, which I don't think is a very good idea.
Another way to respect wildlife is to leave your pets at home. Wildlife and pets aren't always a good combination.
The hills is not a place for Fido, because if an animal attacks that pet is going to come right to me. And when it comes right to me, then I've got to deal with that animal, whatever it might be. A bear, it could even be a raccoon. I've seen raccoons chase dogs. And pet food, by the way. A lot of people just put a little pet food out, you know, in a little dish out by their tent. Not a good idea. That's where the raccoon's going to come. And your livestock food, your horses and mules, whatever they're going to eat. You got to get that up on the tree or in a bear-resistant container so that you can have it.
Proper handling and storage of food and feed is critical in the great outdoors. Be sure to follow any food storage regulations that may be in place for the area you are visiting.
Be aware of what the regulation is with your food storage. There are specific requirements for food storage. Generally, what the requirement is any product that you have with you that has an odor, it has to be made unavailable at certain times so that critters aren't going to get into that.
Bear-resistant containers are generally recommended for food storage. A variety of types and sizes are available, and they can be reviewed at this website of the Interagency Grizzly Bear Committee. Storing food in bear-resistant containers within 100 feet of your campsite is generally considered safe, but sometimes it's advisable to hang your food to keep it away from animals. Here's a demonstration.
We have a couple of hooks that look like this, and they've got a pulley system set up on it, and we're going to hang that up in the tree right now. We've got a pole here.
A collapsing pole that extends to 10 feet or more is the right tool for placing the hooks. You'll want to hang them on live limbs of tall, sturdy trees that are at least 8 or more feet apart.
There's a little hook built on the big hook. He's going to run that hook up. If you put it around too small a limb or a dead limb, it could break off and come down. He's going to put up the other one. You see, I have the pulley that I'm going to use right here. Okay, we've got it hooked up. Next thing I'm going to do is pull it down so that I can reach my box. hook it into one of the hooks, set it just about under the load. Then I can pull about 150 pounds up in the air. And when I hit that pulley, watch what happens. It just keeps going up. And then of course we have to tie this off to a tree. And then when I'm ready to get it down, so all you have to do is grab a hold of the rope and retrieve it.
For smaller, lighter loads, a similar system can be used with smaller hooks, as shown here. Our next demonstration is about game poles with wildlife expert Jamie Junkel.
So instead of climbing up a tree with one pole under your arm and risking death and trying to tie or nail a post or a pole across two trees, what you need to do is go out and search for 3 good stout standing dead logs. Stout enough to hold a couple hindquarters of an elk. With the pole that is going to be your cross pole or hanging pole, cut it to size. So I'm going to hang against these 2 trees in front of me here. So I made sure that this pole is just slightly wider than those 2 trees. Then you just have 2 poles on either side that you connect with tape or rope. This strapping tape is extremely strong. Then you just lay it flat on the ground, and then you just kind of walk it up, hold it nice and steady, and get it right up against your tree nice and tight, as flush as you can against the tree, and then either using rope or strapping tape or wire. This way you're not putting any nails in the tree, and when you leave you can cut away the tape and lay the poles on the ground. No one will ever know you had a hanging pole here.
A good way to keep wildlife a safe distance from your camp is to use an electric fence.
What you need is a 7-strand alternating hot ground wire system. So all a bear has to do is touch the ground wire and touch the hot wire, and he'll get a shock. But having the whole fence system grounded into the soil, where you attach one wire from the ground to the rod and just pound this as deep as you can into the ground, will ensure that you'll get a good shock out of the soil too, so that while the bear or the raccoon or the skunk is standing, he'll get a shock not only from the hot ground system, but he'll also get one from the soil to the hot wire. So it's good to have, at a minimum, 1 ground rod.
There are various types of solar or battery-powered electric barriers available, some that use expandable or bungee-type wiring. Lastly, here's a brief discussion from wildlife expert Chuck Bartlebaugh on bear spray. If you're visiting bear country, don't leave home without it.
When buying bear spray, buy specifically bear spray. Bear spray is a very unique product designed to be used on bears, and it has been shown to be effective almost 100% of the time when deployed properly. Pepper spray is not bear spray and may not have the proper ingredients in it to protect you from a bear. Then when carrying bear spray, it needs to be accessible, either in a hip holster or a chest holster, and easily deployed. And if you hear a bear, see a bear that's acting aggressive or sounding aggressive behind brush, have your bear spray out and ready. It's important to have a firm grip, direct it downwards in front of the bear, and disperse a 2 to 3 second spray if the bear's coming from more than 60 feet away. If it's a close charge, within 20 feet. This is an important situation. You disperse the bear spray directly in front of the bear and continue spraying till the bear breaks off the charge.
Bear spray is formulated to disorient the bear, but not permanently. The effects wear off in about an hour. Thanks for watching and practicing Leave No Trace. In our next segment, we'll cover the Leave No Trace principle. Be considerate of other visitors. We'll see you then. Welcome to Leave No Trace for Stock Users, the video series for folks who bring stock animals into the great outdoors. This series follows the 7 principles of Leave No Trace. Plan ahead and prepare, travel and camp on durable surfaces, dispose of waste properly, leave what you find, minimize campfire impacts, respect wildlife, and be considerate of other visitors. The topic for this part of our series is be considerate of other visitors.
Being courteous to others, I started outfitting many years ago, and in those days we had very few people that would meet on the trail. But today it's changed a good bit, When you're riding down a trail and you meet 20 hikers right in the middle of the trail, what do?
If you look at the total number of visits to public lands in the U.S., we're pushing nearly a billion visits per year. And that's a lot of people trying to enjoy these finite spaces that we have. Interest in things like mountain biking, day hiking, backpacking, even just car camping. All those activities, participation continues to increase.
With meeting people on the trail, we have some guidelines as far as, I guess the hikers theoretically yield to horse people and hikers theoretically yield to mountain bikes and then mountain bikes yield to horses. But as stock users going down the trail, if we have an opportunity to get off the trail, the right thing to do is for the stock person to get off the trail. I mean, it's just trying to make situations work and do what works the best at the time.
Whether you're deep in the wilderness or just off the highway, common courtesy and respect are essential parts of any outdoor experience.
The sense of solitude and sounds of nature, these are really important things to people who spend time in the outdoors. And just being cognizant of how we can impact or unintentionally impact the experience of other people in the outdoors is a really important thing to consider.
We have to learn to yield to other people and get along with other people and understand other users and how they operate. We don't want to stop and take breaks, for instance, right on the trail where we're going to block the trail. We need to get off the trail. We've got to make sure we're not in places where a backpacker or somebody that's going to come and stay overnight in that spot. We don't want our horses and mules making a mess in their spot where it's going to be their living room for an evening.
One of the key ways to reduce issues or even potential conflict is just to have good communication, between user groups. If you're a stock user and you run into a group of hikers,
Hello!
Just a hello, a friendly greeting, just get off on the right foot, so to speak.
If you don't mind, can you get off in that lower side there for us?
Yeah, absolutely. Sounds good.
And would you please speak to each mule, and I'll tell you their names as we go by?
Sounds great. I'd love to meet them.
This is Tess.
Hey, how you doing,
Next one
Tess?
is Concho.
Hey, Concho.
Thank you very much for letting us by.
Yeah, thank you.
As a stock user, you can really be an ambassador for stock use.
Yeah, thank you. Yep, take care.
Being considerate of others is all about building bridges between different user groups. A good way to do that is taking care of your stock waste.
We need to manage that. We need to rehab it if that's a situation, or we just need to not let our stock make deposits in places where they shouldn't be. And that goes a long way to building bridges between us and other users.
And hikers need to be considerate too. I hate to see a hiker move into a meadow and he's occupied a space that's ideal for horses and maybe not so ideal for a hiker. And hikers quite often can find those really nice little niches, smaller sites that horsemen are less likely to use.
Increasingly, the use of technology on the trail is a factor in being considerate of other users.
Particularly the cell phone issue. There's nothing wrong with using a cell phone in the outdoors, but use a cell phone like you would a cat hole, well away from other people. Put the thing in silent or vibrate mode.
The music you can put on cell phones nowadays, I mean, you can have 6,000 songs on a cell phone, and it just makes it easy to make noise, music in a camp setting where in years past we weren't able to do that so much without a big old radio or something. But now it's very simple, and so it's something to really pay attention to.
Sure, and especially in these front country camping situations where we've got all sorts of things that make noise. Generators that may run all night, which may or may not need to run. So thinking about how close are your nearest neighbors and what am I doing that might not only impact them, but may even impact people in my own group. And the whole notion here is really, it's sort of like the golden rule. We just want to do unto others as you would have them do unto you, so that we can all enjoy these limited resources that we have and do what we can to minimize those impacts, whether they're impacts on other people or even impacts on the landscape.
As we've discussed in other segments, bringing dogs along on a pack trip is generally not a good idea.
Dogs and horses and mules quite often don't really relate. And for that problem, it's a good idea to leave the dog at home. He'll be a lot more comfortable and safer, and so will we.
That's a good point, Smoke. If you are going to take your dog in the outdoors, just be mindful of how your dog could impact other people, animals, wildlife in the area. Follow leash laws, leash regulations. Be sure and pick up after your pet. Be a responsible pet owner. Not everybody likes dogs, and not everybody thinks your dog is the greatest dog. So be mindful of those things if you do decide to recreate with your pets.
You should also be mindful of where you keep your stock and of disturbances they may cause, particularly when they're wearing bells.
Where you keep your stock is really critical. Be sure that you're well away from the ideal backpacker campsites, and you need to have your stock where they can be controlled real easily. And of course, bells are a real problem. However, we like to use bells, but I always go around if I have other campers within the area and talk to them about the bells and ask them if the bells are going to bother them. If they are, what we try to do is eliminate those bells for that night. But containing them somewhere which is well out of the way, well away from water, of course, and trails, at least 200 feet.
And always rehab your campsite before you leave, scattering stock manure and removing any evidence that you were there.
Doing that last 5% before we leave camp and scatter things and maybe even go so far as to picking up pine needles and sticks and things and covering things up. It just goes a long way to lessening the visual impact of the fact that we've been there.
Scattering the manure, that's why we have pointy-toed boots. That's so that we can scatter that manure out. And when you scatter that makes it decompose a lot faster, and it doesn't draw as many flies and insects to the area.
Being considerate is a two-way street. It's important for stock users and others who enjoy outdoor recreation to each do their part.
When you look at participation rates in different activities, here in the U.S., there's about 8 million stock users in the U.S., but there's about 16 million backpackers and over 30 million people who camp in some capacity every year. The fact that we're all, again, using the same places, that respect has to go both ways, from stock users to other users and other users back to stock. And a lot of that goes back to the communication piece we were talking about. But this mutual respect idea falls right in line with the principle, be considerate of other visitors.
Consideration always starts with communication. Talking with other users on the trail can prevent problems before they occur.
We ask people to pay a little attention. These are big animals. They're animals of prey. And please let us discuss before we pass you on the trail or before we camp in a campsite. Let's get together and talk about the dangers of these big animals being around you. Quite often I'll take a horse and just lead him over to the campgrounds to where the hikers are camped and lead him around and let them all pet him. It breaks the ice and it lets them understand and respect the use of horses, and gives us a chance to understand and respect the use of the backpacker.
Also, we need to understand that every animal's not built the same. They all have different personalities, just like people do, and so they all react differently to different stimulus. And it just makes sense if we're in a situation where somebody that's not familiar with stock is gonna get close to our stock, we need to educate those people about our animals and what the potentials are from a safety standpoint before somebody gets in trouble and gets hurt.
It all comes back to the simple concept we heard earlier, something called the Golden Rule.
Do unto others as you would have them do unto you, and that will always work in every situation. Try to make things work so that everybody has a good time and walks away safely. That's the best we can hope for.
Yeah.
Thanks for watching and for practicing Leave No Trace. The next segment in our series is about front country considerations. We'll see you then. Welcome to Leave No Trace for Stock Users, the video series for folks who bring stock animals into the great outdoors. This series follows the 7 principles of Leave No Trace. Plan ahead and prepare. Travel and camp on durable surfaces. Dispose of waste properly. Leave what you find. Minimize campfire impacts. Respect wildlife. And be considerate of other visitors. The topic for this part of our series is front country considerations. Your hosts are Ben Lawhon and Bob Hoverson.
In the front country, we're mostly dealing with day ride opportunities, some camping possibly, but oftentimes there's more use in those areas, and also it can be a more diverse use. You get all of the user groups using that piece of real estate at the same time. So it just really heightens the importance that we pay attention to all of these Leave No Trace techniques that we've talked about. The issues are the same, but they're just heightened.
A key issue wherever you visit is trash. Be sure to dispose of all trash properly.
Oftentimes in front country locations there are places where you can dispose of your trash. There's trash cans, there's dumpsters in campgrounds, and so the idea is use those facilities where they exist. Avoid things like burning trash, and that leads right into campfire impacts. In many locations there are issues of invasive species being transported in firewood. So being mindful of where you gather your firewood, whether you bring it from home if that's allowed, or whether you're allowed to gather it on site, or in some cases you've got to purchase firewood locally.
Minimizing campfire impacts is particularly important in front country settings.
It's simple to carry some type of a pan, whether it might be a garbage can lid or an old barbecue grill or a homemade pan that we can build a fire in. When we use that kind of a tool, that piece of equipment, to have our fire, we completely eliminate the impact. There's no black spot, there's no garbage collected. It's just a simple fix for a real problem.
You should always practice courtesy at the trailhead. That starts with how you park your vehicles and trailers.
A lot of trailheads are small, and you get some of these bigger trailers pulled into a trailhead, and one vehicle can take up 5 parking places if they park the wrong direction. So it's just being considerate of other people that are going to be there using the trailhead.
Disposing of stock waste is an essential part of leaving no trace. Once again, common courtesy is the rule.
Manure is always a problem we just need to deal with, and as stock users, the key to it is deal with it. Pick it up, throw it back in your trailer, put it in a can, do whatever we got to do, or put it in an established depository that some trailheads do have, but don't leave it there, don't leave a mess.
Make sure your stock animals are trained and prepared for the conditions they will encounter in the front country.
We get pawing stock tied to our trailers, try to correct those problems at home before you ever get there. Do whatever it takes to stop that pawing, but for gosh sakes, if you do have a pawing animal and you've created a hole in the ground, rehab it before you leave the site. Put it, it's real easy to just rehab it and make it look like it did before the pawing ever started.
And have a plan for watering your animals without damaging the area around water sources.
A lot of trailheads have developed water sources, which are super, but a lot of our more dispersed trailheads don't have any water facilities, and so sometimes there's a creek nearby. We have to take our stock down to the creek to water. We need to be very careful about how we do that so we don't break down stream banks and cause problems that way. Or we always have the option of packing water with us if we're there for a shorter period of time. There are commercially available water tanks that fit right in our horse trailers.
To maximize the experience for you and other visitors, always keep noise to a minimum.
Just doing what you can to minimize the noise, whether it's engines running, generators at night, loud music, what have you. Just being aware of the fact that people come to these places to escape in some cases, and really just to immerse themselves in nature, and that's a big part of it.
In heavily used areas, consider that the crowds and congestion may offer opportunities for being considerate of others.
That issue of congestion, just being aware of that, being conscientious of other visitors who either need to unload stock, reload stock, mountain bikers wanting to get on the trail and unload their equipment, or backpackers or hikers, just thinking about how all that can work out, talking with other groups, find out when are you planning on taking off, how big's your group, where are you headed, and really working together to create that cooperative sort of spirit at these places.
Vandalism in the front country can take many forms. Some of them are subtle, none of them appropriate.
There's just no excuse for vandalism. Even the simple little thing of signing your initials in an outhouse or something like that, it's just not appropriate behavior. And then we always get the paper plate tacked to a tree, you know, turn here kind of thing.
Yeah, same goes with flagging, orange tape, any of those things. They're certainly useful in times when those are necessary, but it's a matter of remembering where it is, where you put it. When you're done with it, take it down so that it doesn't stay there.
If you bring your dog along, pick up and dispose of waste. And beyond that, manage your pets with other visitors in mind.
A lot of front country locations, pets are required to be on leash. And just adhering to that, it's not only for the other people in the area and other animals in the area, other pets, but it's also for wildlife in the area. And you know, having your dog on a leash in places that have rattlesnakes, for example, it keeps your dog safe. So just giving some thought to pets and pet management, knowing that not everybody likes dogs, but those of us that do tend to take our dogs outside, it's a matter of being mindful of not only the waste they generate, but also the other impacts that dogs can create.
Stopping the introduction and spread of invasive weed seeds is another crucial concern.
Best way to deal with weeds is to clean your animals at home, clean your truck and trailer at home. Don't sweep out your trailer at the trailhead. All of us pretty much groom our animals before we saddle, and if they've been kept in a weedy pasture of any kind, it's very easy for them to have weed seeds in their manes and tails, and if we wait till we get to the trailhead to comb them out, if they're full of weed seeds, those weed seeds hit the ground, and then we've got a problem.
Safety for your group and for your neighbors should be a top priority in any activities you do with your stock animals.
You've got your animals tied up to your trailer in the campsite. Hikers may walk too close, mountain bikers may ride by too close, and it's helping to educate those people about how to stay safe around you and your equipment, and that goes both ways, but really giving some thought to how in these diverse, busy front country areas where we've got vehicle traffic and we've got dogs and we've got stock and other users, just giving some thought to how we can promote a safe environment for everybody that's there.
And how we manage our riders that are in our group. I've seen situations where a group shows up at a trailhead, you know, the kids like to go riding, and so they get on their ponies and all of a sudden they're galloping around the trailhead and not paying a whole lot of attention to anybody else that's around there, and it's an opportunity for them to get hurt, and it's an opportunity for them to hurt somebody else. Helmets have become an optional thing, whether somebody wants to wear a helmet or not. It's an option that's out there for folks. But just being considerate, stopping and talking to people, making sure that if you meet a hiker on the trail, the key there is to give up the right-of-way whenever you can, regardless of who you are. As a horseman, if you have the ability to get off the trail easier than a hiker that's coming at you, do it. You know, what the heck, get off the trail.
Stock users can play a leadership role in the front country by being educated about rules and procedures and helping to educate others.
For stock users to have the opportunity to help educate people, we create an environment where everybody's getting along, and there's a lot of good in that when we're in front country, in areas that tend to see a lot of usage. And that goes right in line with just knowing the regulations. Know what other users might be in the area, know what the rules and regulations are for everything from campfires to human waste disposal to how you confine your stock, and that's another important issue in front country.
You got them tied to a trailer. Oftentimes they aren't real comfortable being tied to a trailer, especially if the flies are bad or anything, so you have to do things, use fly spray on them. Train them to do those things at home. Once again, do this stuff at home. If you're using pickets, hobbles, high lines, or electric fence, no matter what it is, make sure that these animals are trained at home and they understand what that is, and they'll stand much quieter.
Finally, let the leave no trace principles guide your actions. You'll find they work in just about any situation.
The key for front country is just being aware that these areas tend to attract more people, more usage, the impacts tend to be more concentrated. The techniques that you're learning here, they work just as well in front country as they do in back country. The real key is just making yourself aware of the different techniques that will allow you to minimize your impact in these areas.
Thanks for watching and for practicing Leave No Trace. The next segment in our series will be on assembling a minimum impact camp. We'll see you then. Welcome to Leave No Trace for Stock Users, the video series for folks who bring stock animals into the great outdoors. This series follows the 7 principles of Leave No Trace. Plan ahead and prepare. Travel and camp on durable surfaces. Dispose of waste properly. Leave what you find. Minimize campfire impacts. Respect wildlife. And be considerate of other visitors. The topic for this part of our series is assembling a minimum impact camp. Your hosts are Bob Hoverson and Smoke Helser.
There are 3 specific reasons we use horses to go to the backcountry. The first one is we can go further into the backcountry. That is, we can use the entire resource instead of just using the outlying edges. The second reason is that we can stay longer. That means we can pack more equipment and go in longer and stay longer in the heart of some of our areas which are very large. The third reason is we can take some amenities with us so that we can make camp and make camp comfortable, just as we have here.
The first step in setting up a comfortable camp is to carefully select your site.
We'll take a good look around. First of all, I'll make sure there's no carcasses or bear tracks or skinned up trees where a bear has been clawing a little bit and rubbing. You know, they'll leave hair on those trees quite often. We'll check that all out real well, and we'll start to set up our camp. The first thing we do is I like to set up a fly. That protects us from the sun and from the weather. We set up our fly. We don't carry poles or anything else. We tie to a tree. What I don't do is I don't tie around the tree. I tie on a limb or across the limb so that I don't damage the tree at all.
After you've taken care of what's overhead, it's time to consider what's underfoot.
We need to have something down on the ground so that we aren't killing all the vegetation there. And this allows water to go through it. It allows the plants underneath to breathe. When I take this up, I take up all the micro trash, first of all, with it. And then the grass is able to recover very quickly. We don't kill the crowns of the grass.
As a rule, all your camping materials and equipment should be lightweight, easy to pack, and designed for minimal impact.
This whole camp came in on 3 mules, actually. We can move everything we need for 4 people for 6 days right here. And we have kitchens all set up. I have propane units that I use. This is another kitchen box here. I can use some food in here. Here we got napkins. We got our food boxes right here. These are bear-resistant containers. They're made out of aluminum. They're very light.
It's important that you filter the water you get from a local source to guard against any pathogens.
This is a water filter system. This is a bag that I can fill with 2 buckets of water. There we go. Hanging up the tree, and I only have to get it about that high. And it works just about perfect. So I can reach almost any limb and have my water system right there real easy.
When placing your tents, toilet, and animal containments, remember to locate them at least 200 feet from water sources or trails.
Our toilet facility is back here in the trees, well away from camp and well away from our water system, where we're going to get our drinking water, which is over here in the creek. And we're going to put our horses over there and back over in there. We'll set up electric fence, we'll have a high line, and we'll have a manger in case we had to bring in some hay for this particular trip. Of course, we have all our hand tools that we bring in with us. You always have to have a saw. We have 2 different kinds of saws. I have a crosscut here. There's another handle that goes on the other end of this saw. And I have a smaller limb saw.
In addition to efficiency and low impact, you might also want to consider aesthetics in your campsite.
Things about this camp that are kind of unique. The first thing is the tents all match into the background. They're green or dark colors so that they blend into the surroundings.
Smoke says it's all about maximizing the outdoor experience by minimizing impacts.
And that's why we try to set up a minimum impact camp so that when I leave this camp, the next person that comes in here can come right in and camp with his family and stay in the same place.
A campsite for fall or hunting season can be a little different. Here's Bob Hoverson with an example.
We start with the tent. I suppose the norm in a fall hunting camp situation is an all-canvas tent. Has been for years. There's absolutely nothing wrong with an all-canvas tent. The thing that we have available to us today are different fabrics that that are much lighter and less bulky, and that's what we have in this particular fabric here in this tent. This whole tent weighs less than 50 pounds, and the beauty of this particular material is that even when it gets wet, it doesn't gain any weight. That's a huge consideration when you're packing out of camp. If you have to pack a wall tent that's twice as heavy as it was when you came in.
When selecting your tent, match it to your party size and expected weather conditions.
The thing that makes this really work slick and easy is the internal tent frame that you can get, and actually you can get an internal tent frame with any wall tent of any kind. That you can make them yourself, or you can purchase them ready-made. You just get them sized to your tent. The beauty of an internal tent frame is that you don't have to cut down 7 trees to pitch a wall tent. That's a huge thing when it comes to leave no trace. Depending where you're camping, sometimes 7 good poles aren't even available, and it's a lot quicker way to set up a tent than going around and chasing poles and tying things together and getting it all up. And the internal tent frame with a modern fabric is just a great way to go with a tent.
A protective ground cloth is also recommended for your tent's interior.
We also like to use the filter cloth. This pretty much eliminates any trampling and scuffing that occurs under here. When we pull this up and walk away, you hardly know we've been here. The beauty of this material is it's porous and it sweeps just like a kitchen floor, and you can keep your tent just slick and clean all the time.
As we saw in Smoke's example, lightweight tables, chairs, and cots are important for ease of packing in and out. The same principle applies to your wood stove.
Anything we bring in, we want to make sure we pack it back out with us. So a stove like this, that all the stuff on here, the water jacket, the extra shelf, the legs, the spark arrestor, they all fit inside of the box. Stovepipe, you can actually get nesting stovepipes that'll all nest together, and you just come out as one chunk of stovepipe, which makes it real easy to pack.
Of course, you can use your wood stove for cooking as well as for heat, but Bob has some ideas about that.
Everybody has their own style of cooking, and that kind of determines what sort of a kitchen you're going to have. Propane, for me, it's much cleaner, much quicker, much more reliable than always cooking on wood. In the mornings, that stove's not always going, and so it's nice to have propane that you can just pop on and you're rocking and rolling.
Here's another point on cooking that deals with disposal of food particles and gray water.
I like to use what we call a slop bucket. I just use a 5-gallon bucket. You know, your gray water, when you're cooking or when you're cleaning your dishes or anything, you can just pour that into the slop bucket and take just a regular kitchen strainer. That they usually have 2 little hooks over the front of them, and they have a handle, so you can just set that right on here, and you can pour the water right down through the strainer, and it takes all the food particles and everything out of your gray water, and then your gray water goes outside, and you scatter the gray water, the food particles and everything goes in your garbage. So it's just a slick way to keep from throwing food particles and anything out in the brush that might attract bears or other animals.
In the fall, as in other seasons, bear-resistant food containers are essential and sometimes required, and you should always pack appropriate tools.
It's pretty hard to be in a camping situation where you don't have an axe and a saw and a shovel to, for one, clear your trails on the way in, or cut obstacles, logs and whatnot out of your way, and rather than making new trails around them. So it's a good idea to always have a good axe and a shovel and a saw of some type with you.
To sum it up, if you keep it simple and bring the right equipment, you're more likely to leave no trace.
Just a simple camp like this with I guess you'd say state-of-the-art equipment makes it very, very comfortable, very, very easy and lightweight, and just good for the land all the way around.
Thanks for watching and for practicing Leave No Trace. The next and final segment will be on equipment and techniques for stock containment and grazing. We'll see you then. Welcome to Leave No Trace for Stock Users, the video series for folks who bring stock animals into the great outdoors. This series follows the 7 principles of Leave No Trace. Plan ahead and prepare. Travel and camp on durable surfaces. Dispose of waste properly. Leave what you find. Minimize campfire impacts. Respect wildlife. And be considerate of other visitors. The topic for this part of our series is equipment and technique for stock containment and grazing. Your hosts are veteran outfitters Smoke Elser and Bob Hoverson.
This is what we call a high line, mostly for restraining stock overnight or in areas where we can't loose graze them. The high line seems to be the most effective means of total control.
The right high line equipment and techniques are key to prevent serious injury to your animals or even death. For starters, use tree saver straps.
It's just a wide strap that goes around the tree. They have to be above your animal's ears and they have to be tight. Loose high lines can injure animals quite easily.
With your straps, use strong, stretch-resistant ropes. The sling ropes from your pack saddles work well and will allow you to pack in less rope. And there are many hardware options for attaching your straps.
The type I prefer has a loop built into the end of it. This gives you a tightening ability. You can actually tighten your high line by pulling on the end of the tree saver strap.
Placement of your animals on the high line is your next critical concern.
Spreading them apart is really important. You don't want 2 animals standing together where they can cross around and get tied up, or if you got animals that kind of have a tendency to pick at each other, you want to be able to separate them. And a simple old cinch ring will do that. You take off an old cinch and you can just put that in the line, just thread the rope through it and bring it around the whole thing, and you got something to tie into. It gives you a stationary point on your line. A prusik knot is a pretty decent way to tie animals to a high line. And it'll sag down there to tighten down to where it will not move back and forth on the line, but yet it's one that you can loosen up and you can very easily move it up and down the line to wherever you want it.
Another alternative is a fastener with a swivel rather than a stationary connector. If your horse moves in a circular motion, the swivel can help prevent ropes from unraveling or ropes becoming tightened to the high line, which could choke your animal. Always select quality hardware that can hold up to the weight and strength of a large animal.
Once we have the high line up, the tighter you get this, the better off it is. So we just like to pull these things tight, and then to tie it off, you can simply do a half hitch or a loop and then half hitch a couple, 3 times over these just to keep them from slipping.
Never leave excess high line rope dangling. Secure the rope to prevent entanglements with your animals. The next step is attaching your animal to the high line.
When you have a swivel or any one of those other type of devices, you'd simply thread through there, and I normally tie with just a normal stable knot like that with a half hitch on it from your horse.
Other types of knots can also be effective. Smoke has a tip on determining the correct length of rope for tying your animal.
I always get him at his normal head height. And I want this distance from here to that rope the same length as I tie to. So quite often, if you just lead him up and at his normal head height, if you drop the rope, pick it up right here at the ground, now you're ready to tie. And that distance will be the same so that he can reach the ground.
It's important to train your animals at home so they're used to the high line and other restraints when they get to the hills. A high line can be highly effective in controlling your animals, but it should not be your only method.
You'll find that your impacts are much less if you have this combination of uses where you can leave them on the high line for overnight or whatever it is, and then at some point you can take them over into an electric fence, for instance, and let them loosen up a little bit, bring them back and tie them on the high line, and they'll stand much calmer and quite comfortably.
When you leave your camp, be sure to rehab the area under your high line by scattering any stock manure and spreading pine needles and such. By using a high line correctly, you prevented damage that can happen when animals are tied directly to trees or too close to trees. But there may be times on the trail when you need to tie animals to trees for short periods. For that purpose, use the cross-tie technique.
We're still trying to keep our animals off the roots of the trees and keep them from chewing on the trees, so you just need a small rope that you carry along with you. Use your halter rope on one side and take this little smaller rope, and you can either have a snap, or you can simply use it around your animal. They're effectively cross-tied.
Another option for stock containment is an electric fence, either solar or battery powered. First, select an area at least 200 feet from water or trails and a good distance from your tents. And pick an area with grasses your animals will eat. This will help you reduce the amount of feed you pack in.
Now, in order to set up an electric fence like this, the first thing you have to have is the right kind of poles. And you have to have the right height. And you know, sometimes you might have to raise it up higher or lower it, and these pegs or poles are built just exactly for that purpose. And you'll notice we've already got our ground rod driven in. We try to keep all the grass away from it. Just pull the tops of the grasses off that are touching the fence, because that way it doesn't ground this fence off in some unusual place and make it unusable. We set it up so that it's in a 4-leaf clover system, so that I can leave the charging unit and the ground peg in one place. So I can put it here, and all I have to do is take this side of the fence down, move it over that way, and I got another clover. And then I can take that side down and move it over, and I have another clover. So that's the way I like to set mine up.
A simpler alternative to an electric fence is to use construction site fence material. It's lightweight, yet durable, and easy to wrap around trees to create an enclosure.
I just stretch that around 3 or 4 trees, and I can make my own corral, and I can have it about that high off the ground. So it's just perfect.
If you pack feed, always use certified weed seed-free hay or pellets. It prevents the spread of noxious weeds and invasive species, and it's mandatory in some areas. Here are some techniques for transporting feed.
Here's about a 55-pound bale of hay that's been compressed down to a small block that I can easily pack. And we like to feed it in a manger like this. It lets dust flow through the manger. Look at the dust come out of there that my horse doesn't get. I like that. And when he tramples that hay into the ground, when you feed it on the ground, they trample it in, and that makes a campsite very hard to rehabilitate.
You notice we put a stick on each end too. That spreads the manger. If you don't have a stick in there, it'll compress and they have a hard time getting into it.
Maybe you want to take in some pellets. We've gone to a little nose bag that looks like this. I can slip them over his ears, and he's got his pellets right there with him. And these fold up so that they're like this.
Once again, loose grazing your animals, when possible, would have the lightest impact on the land. But to find them when they've finished feeding, you may need bells.
Now there's a couple of little tricks. You see, I got a little hole cut in there so that this strap is all I have to do is push it in there, and it doesn't make noise going down the trail, you see? No noise at all, see? But when I take that off, now I can find my horse.
Other techniques for controlling the movement of your animals include the use of hobbles and pickets.
This is a restraining hobble. That is, it just keeps the horse's feet real close together like that. And you'll notice it's padded, and it goes around both front feet. And they keep the horse from traveling. Here's another real inexpensive hobble. And it's just a burlap bag with the bottom cut out. And then you can use a thing like this, which is a picket pin. And what I'll do is I put this bracelet around one leg, and we put this in the ground. You do have to break a horse to picket.
If you bring a salt lick for your stock, be sure to carry it in and out in a bag. Don't leave it behind to attract other animals and their impacts. And don't forget to pack fly repellent for your horses.
It's a real good fly repellent. It's a roll-on, and I like this because it doesn't run when the horse sweats. Put one foot through it.
Now that you know a variety of techniques for stock containment and grazing, practice and use a variety of them. No one technique is always appropriate, and a mix of methods could make each of them more effective. And no one knows your animals better than you, so develop a feel for which techniques to use on your animals in different situations. Thanks for watching this final segment in the series and for practicing Leave No Trace. We invite you to learn more about the program and principles at this website.